Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is convicted of murdering George Floyd in Minnesota, a verdict that is reverberating across the country. We'll talk with local journalists about the reaction. The long vacant site of the former Michael Reese Hospital in Bronzeville is set to get new life. We'll tell you how planners are involving the community in its ambitious plan. A trip down memory lane with the WTTW program Our People from the late 60s and early 70s brought back memories for one viewer. We'll hear his story.
Hello Central, give me 609.
And meet the woman who styled Viola Davis's hair in the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. She's nominated for tonight's Oscar Awards. First off tonight, after a year of protests and a 3-week-long trial, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murdering George Floyd, a conviction President Joe Biden called, quote, a giant step forward in the march toward justice in America. Joining us to talk about the verdict, the reaction, and what comes next are Brandon Pope, reporter and anchor at CW26 and writer for Ebony Magazine, Cheryl Corley, Chicago-based correspondent for NPR, and DOMETI PONGO, MTV News correspondent. Thanks to all three of you for joining us on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. You know, we have heard a lot this past few weeks, about how emotionally taxing these times have been for Black people. Even the International Women's Media Foundation has started the Black Journalist Therapy Relief Fund. So I wanted to check, how are each of you doing? Cheryl Corley, I'll come to you first.
I'm doing fine. You know, I think that when you cover trials, and I was covering the trial, you're pretty focused on doing that job. So that's how it was for me. Of course, I also knew about the heavy responsibility of covering this trial was as well. So that was on my mind. I mean, it was a tense situation, and you know, you as a journalist are wondering what's going to happen like everybody else. But I was fine with covering it.
Brandon Pope?
It's been tough. It's been tough. You know, a lot of people had a collective sigh of relief at the verdict. But I found it tough to find joy because the verdict doesn't change my reality today or next week. It doesn't change the talk I have to have with my niece or nephew the next month. And so, you know, I want to see some progress, and I'm hoping that we don't get complacent here and keep our eye on the prize and keep fighting for progressive change.
DOMETI PONGO?
Yeah, it's definitely been tough. But to echo Brandon's sentiment and what Cheryl said as well, you know, it's like Nina Simone said, you know, the artist's duty is to reflect the times. And it's a privilege that we have these megaphones and these microphones to add context and nuance to everything that we're seeing happening. So even on the worst days, I feel privileged to have this opportunity to, I guess, do my little bit to try to tell these stories. And so it's been tough but rewarding.
Cheryl Corley, you've been in Minneapolis covering this. What was it like for you as a Chicagoan and knowing the history that this city has as well to watch the trial and the verdict unfold there in Minneapolis?
Well, it was very interesting because, as you mentioned, you know, we have somewhat similar histories. We've seen a lot of things happen here in Chicago. It made me think about the Laquan McDonald trial, the trial for Van Dyke and Laquan McDonald case. So, you know, those kind of similarities were, you know, something that I was thinking about as I was covering the trial. But, you know, we've seen these kinds of tensions all over the country. not just in Chicago, not just in Minneapolis. So just kept all of that in mind as I was covering it.
Brandon, Cheryl just mentioned the Laquan McDonald trial and the trial of Jason Van Dyke, that entire debacle. Brandon, how do you compare these two cases, if at all?
It's heavy because, like Cheryl said, we are dealing with a lot of the same things. I think a lot of these Midwest cities are. I was in the courtroom for the Van Dyke verdict, and the community was on edge, just like they were for this verdict with the Chauvin trial. Lots of similarities here. I think there was more of a sense with the Chauvin trial of justice being served than it was necessarily with the Van Dyke trial. And there's still more to come when it comes to sentencing and seeing what happens there. But the way the cities both feel, they feel that anxiety, that tension, and they want to see something done, just a matter of when that's going to be.
If I could add something to that really quickly.
Go ahead.
One thing that's interesting with both of these trials is oftentimes when a guilty verdict comes down, we expect a sense of exuberation, this adulation, everyone's celebrating, yes, justice finally being served. But the similarities between these two cases, I think they're extreme cases. You've got one person being knelt on for 9 minutes, that whole excruciating murder captured on camera. Then you got Laquan McDonald, 16 shots. So we're in this weird space of, yes, celebrating that guilty verdicts have come down, but then also thinking about this idea that are guilty verdicts only possible in the most egregious, videotaped, highly documented, highly publicized cases. And those are the big similarities between those two.
And that sense of mourning as well. We've got lost lives here. It's tough to find joy knowing that someone's life is taken, their son is gone, their father is gone. That's tough to grapple with.
And also knowing that there's so much more to do. I mean, we've seen so many instances of, even after this decision, of more shootings, more people losing their lives. So even while there was some celebration, we had these other tragedies occurring, and that kind of muting even the celebration that was occurring in the Chauvin case.
And of course, after the verdict came down earlier or last week, we heard from some elected officials and even a sports organization, and they've taken some criticism for their responses. For example, Nancy Pelosi saying, quote, "Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. Because of you and because of millions of people around the world who came out for justice. Your name will always be synonymous for justice." And then the Las Vegas Raiders tweeted, quote, "I can breathe," with the date of the verdict. DOMETI, let's come back to you. What is your reaction to these statements?
Pelosi's statement made me very uncomfortable because there's this idea that there's some nobility in martyrdom. And make no mistake, we've seen pundits on the right really nail this, like, oh, this guy shouldn't be a martyr, and try to criminalize his character, mischaracterize him because of his past drug misuse and all these different things. And it's like, wait a minute, this guy didn't choose to be a sacrifice. There's no nobility in going to the store and not being able to come home and not see your family. And it's more than semantical to talk about the difference between this idea of justice versus accountability. What we saw with this guilty verdict is accountability, because justice would have been George Floyd getting charged or getting his day in court for the alleged counterfeit $20 bill he had. So this isn't really justice so much as it's holding police officers accountable in a way that we should always have been doing. And this isn't something that Floyd wanted to be. So I know we're trying to find silver linings, and yes, his name is synonymous with this big watershed moment in history, but make no mistake, this man did not set out to be a martyr or a sacrifice in the way of civil rights. He's just a regular guy. And with Mark Davis, I think those tone-deaf comments as well just speak to the lack of diverse voices in a room to help to say that, hey, wait a minute, this might be taken the wrong way. But I must say that Mark has a great relationship with Floyd's brother, so he didn't take offense to it. But once things go out to the internet, they take a shape of their own.
Well, just a statement. Go ahead, Cheryl. Go ahead.
Okay, are you sure? I thought Pelosi's comments were pretty appalling. I mean, she had a lot of people in the Congressional Black Caucus who could have stood up there and said something or advised her a little better, perhaps. George Floyd certainly wasn't thinking about sacrificing his life for justice. He was murdered, However, people do misspeak and make mistakes, and I don't want to apologize for Nancy Pelosi in any way, but she is an advocate for civil rights and racial justice and has the power to push through legislation that's going to make a difference or could make a difference. So, I just think it was a bad moment for her. And as far as the Mark Davis and the Raiders, when saying I can't breathe, I thought that was really odd too, but he explained what he meant and what the organization meant. And, lots of people were holding their breath over what this verdict would be.
And clearly sorry to jump in on you, Cheryl, there's clearly a lot to talk about here. And I'm sure conversations that I'll have to have all three of you back on to talk about again. But we're out of time. My thanks to Brandon Pope, DOMETI PONGO, and Cheryl Corley for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And join me tomorrow night at 8 for our Black Voices community conversation. We're talking with community organizers along with current and former police officers about the Chauvin conviction and the killing of George Floyd. You can visit WTTW.com/events to RSVP. After more than a decade of sitting unused, the former Michael Reese Hospital site in Southside Bronzeville appears headed for redevelopment. Earlier this year, the Chicago Plan Commission approved a $3.8 billion effort to overhaul the property just west of the lakefront on 31st Street. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, the team behind the development is thinking big and working for community buy-in.
Michael Reese Hospital was one of Chicago's oldest, founded in 1881 and demolished in 2009.
There's been a number of iterations of should this be the Olympics, should this be Amazon HQ2?
The city bought the 50-acre property as it was preparing for its failed 2016 Olympics bid. In 2017, it picked a team of developers to take over the site and create a master plan for a massive mixed-use development.
We knew the potential of this site and what it really could mean for the entire South Side and the people who are most vulnerable in our city who need it most.
The project's first phase is set to include the ARC Innovation Center, an equity-focused research arm of Israel's renowned Sheba Medical Center. ARC's mission is to make healthcare accessible, and the designers of the Bronzeville lakefront site say this building will reflect that.
It frames a literal gateway into the development, but it also frames a gateway towards the Singer Pavilion, which is a historic building that we're choosing to preserve and keep on the site.
Beyond keeping that building, urban designers and architects are working to reimagine just about every facet of the massive site.
Everything from the roads to the parks to the blocks to the uses, what the place should look and feel like, and then how it should connect back to the surrounding community.
And the developers and designers working on the project say the community has played an integral role. It's not a one-and-done town hall meeting. 4th Ward Alderman Sophia King put together a Michael Reese Advisory Council to weigh in every step of the way.
For many of us who live on the South Side, this is long overdue. I think the development team is taking very seriously what they're contributing to the neighborhood. Once this is done, I think we'll set a new standard for development on the South Side.
Urban designer David Scully is a Southside native and graduate of IIT, a mile away from the site. He says true community engagement is a way not just to win support, but to create something that feels like it's part of Bronzeville.
You always want to be working with community to actually create something that's more than the sum of the parts. It's not just a new building here and a new park here, that those actually have tangible meaning for the neighborhood.
In addition to the ARC Innovation Center, the site's also slated to have market rate and affordable housing, including for seniors, retail with discounted rent for some local businesses, green space, and a community center.
The folks here in the community need to feel like it is part of Bronzeville. It's not a separate district. It's not, a gated community. And that connection brings me joy personally.
Farpoint's Morgan Malone says she hopes the community-centric approach can be a model beyond this one project.
Where it may seem hard, it may seem too complex, when you put people first, you can win, you can do it, it can be financed, it can be possible, and everyone will benefit. And so we're excited to prove it.
The redevelopment of the full site is expected to be a 2-decade effort, but the Advisory Council's Kinshasa Baldwin says if you haven't spent much time in the area, you don't have to wait.
Come on down. Come hang out. Come on down. Bronzeville, it has spirit, it has soul, approachable soul, I should say. It's not an area where, you come into it, but you feel like an outsider. When you come into this community, you're welcome.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
The master plan still has to clear other key committees and the full city council. The development team hopes to complete the $600 million Phase 1 by 2026. From 1968 to 1972, WTTW aired the weekly program Our People, hosted by Jim Tillman, one of the first of its kind to provide a forum for Black issues featuring guests like Harold Washington before he became mayor, and author and activist James Baldwin. During Black History Month, we re-aired recently unearthed clips of the program, and it brought back memories for one viewer whose father appeared on the show all those years ago. It was a program that gave a platform to Black celebrities like Diane Carroll, Sammy Davis Jr., and James Baldwin.
But I'm not capable of hating anybody.
But also local artists like Jose Williams. He appeared on the show in November 1970. Though the episode itself has been lost, a few images were recovered, bringing back memories for Williams' son, Kim.
That's a young dude. That's a real young dude. But I was about 14. He was about 39 at the time. But it was exciting.
Today, the senior Williams is 90 years young. And though he doesn't remember much about being on Our People, he does remember what's important, creating his art.
As long as one lives, you're creating something. It depends on what form. It might be a form of painting. It might be a form of photography. It might be a form of drawing. But ideas are always there. Creativity never leaves one's mind because that's what one's gift is. So if you find out what your gift is, you do that until you move into the next life, until you leave this life. But you're always working.
We spoke to them from their home in Virginia. Kim Williams, who recently moved from Chicago, saw the clips of Our People replaying on Black Voices. He recalls the importance of the program at the time, presenting opportunities for the Black community to tell its own story.
That was a must-see TV of our time in Chicago, and people who came to Chicago took that news somewhere else.
Jose Williams did recall that in the late 60s and early 70s, there were no galleries for Black artists to display their work, so he and others had to create their own spaces, including one on 31st Street called 353 East. You can learn more about the Our People program on our website. Up next, a Gary, Indiana native is the first Black woman to be nominated for Best Makeup and Hairstyling at tonight's Oscars. We revisit our conversation with NEAL, recorded last month when she was first nominated. Rainey made history as the mother of blues. Movie watchers get an earful of her music and her story in the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which depicts a recording session in 1920 Chicago. Not too far from Chicago, history is also being made. A Gary, Indiana native is one of the first Black women to be nominated for an Oscar in makeup and hairstyling. Joining us is NEAL, the hair department head for the film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and who is making Oscar history alongside her colleague Jamaica Wilson as the first Black woman nominated in makeup and hairstyling. NEAL, congratulations and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So what was your reaction to this news when you learned that you had received this nomination, but that you're actually making Oscar history with this nomination?
I know. Listen, the whole thing just feels like it's hard to explain. I feel like I'm having an out of body experience. It's just hard to believe that all of that is happening. You know, like you go to work and you do your job, and especially when you work behind the scenes, you're not used to having anything in the spotlight, you know? And so for that to happen, like at this caliber, it's unbelievable. I'm so grateful. Extremely grateful.
Now, part of your job was nailing the hairstyles for the 20s for Black people, both in Chicago, but also, you know, maybe at a tent in the country, on the road. What did you look to for inspiration for those?
So there are only like 7 photographs of Ma Rainey herself, which is really interesting. And I could only find 2 while I was doing the research. Now I look up a lot of photographs of like Harlem Renaissance and that sort of thing. because a lot of the people that, did that Great Migration, they came from down south and they came to the north and sort of landed in Harlem. And so there are a lot of photographs there that really kind of depict both kind of Southern and, very much so city looks of the 20s. The research part is actually one of my favorite parts whenever I get a film. Just, going through there, I usually look up a lot of photographers, like Black photographers of the time, and I go off of the photographs that they used. And so that's what I did. And as far as Ma Rainey goes, there was something written that Ann Roth, the costume designer, found that said that she wore horsehair wigs. And so we decided that we should definitely go with that since we couldn't find that many facts about how she looked. And so that was interesting. It was the first time I made a wig out of horsehair, which is nothing like human hair. And I had no idea it was going to show up covered in lice and manure. So that also was interesting.
Here's a clip from the film with film star, of course, Viola Davis.
I never could stand no silence. I always had to have some music going on in my head somewhere. It keeps things balanced. Music could do that, it fills things up. More music you have in the world, full it is.
So what was it about Ma Rainey's story that attracted you to the film? And also, what did you learn about her through styling her character, through styling her hair?
Well, I definitely learned about the horsehair wig and the continuity of it. I think that just Ma Rainey herself was such a complex woman, right? Like, this was a woman who grew up in the rural, southern part of Georgia. She changed her name, moved, came from probably would have been sharecroppers. If you think about it, she's the first generation born free in this country of her family. And she just did not, also being a dark-skinned woman, a lot of people who wrote about her described her as the most unattractive woman in show business. And so just having like all of these things and just realizing that, I'm still going to go out and get everything I want in this life, no matter the obstacles. She didn't follow any rules, which is just highly respected when you think about a woman in the 20s, woman of color, like just all boundaries broken. She had a husband and a girlfriend. She wore fur coats in the summertime, like this woman, gold teeth, like the whole nine. There's just something about that you have to respect, that, her life could have been in danger during this time. She spoke to men like men speak to men during that time. And so I learned that this was a very brave woman who was way ahead of her time. And, I'm glad that George C. Wolfe and Denzel and August Wilson and that, all of this came together so that people now know her, because she really had been erased. And hopefully people will not only watch the movie, but go and read about her and look up other things, because she really was an interesting woman.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen the movie and she is interesting. I wanted to ask you and Jamaica Wilson, with whom you're nominated, the first Black women to receive this nomination, as we mentioned. What is your reaction to what critics say is a lack of diversity in entertainment?
Yeah, my theory on it is, what's a way to put it? Evolution is inevitable, and anything that has ever resisted evolution, no matter how big or small, is now extinct. So, I that's what I tell myself, and that's how, I believe that. And so I just think that things are changing because it's inevitable. It's inevitable. And I think that the majority of people celebrate diversity and they want it. I think that ultimately we have sort of inherited a mess, and none of us really were here to determine those rules of society, but we are here now and we can change them, so that's my take on it.
All right. And Mia, Neal, best of luck to you at the Oscars, and congratulations again. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it, especially, Chicago. Hey, Chicago. Hey, Gary, Indiana. Thanks.
And the Academy Awards ceremony airs tonight at 7 p.m. We're back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this. And that's our show for this Sunday night. Join Paris Schutz and me this week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. One-on-one with Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx on bail reform efforts, the police killing of Adam Toledo, and more. Plus, they're almost on the clock. What are the Bears' biggest needs heading into the NFL draft? Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.